Finally, we are going to be recording this meeting so that for anybody who's not able to participate this evening or tomorrow, we'll be able to post the presentation on the project website as a YouTube link. So anybody who hasn't had a chance to participate will be able to see what you've seen as well. So next slide, please. So again, purpose of tonight's meeting is really to provide an information overview of the proposed and draft Glendora Station Area Vision Plan. This plan is posted online, as I mentioned. And while we really are intending for tonight's meeting to provide you an overview of what the plan is, what it says, how you can participate and provide feedback on the plan at this stage in the process. This is still a draft plan, so tonight's meeting is not a public hearing. It's really intended to provide you information about how to read the plan and how to provide your thoughtful comments on the plan as it moves forward through the deliberation process and drafting process. We'd ask that if you have comments that you'd like to provide in written format through the website, that you do so by May 9th. This will allow us then to kind of respond to those comments as we take this plan up to the next set of meetings. And like I said, again, primary purpose of tonight's meeting and tomorrow morning's meeting, which will be exactly the same as tonight, is really to provide you an overview of the plan and how you can provide thoughtful feedback on it. So next slide. And at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Hans Friedel to talk about the plan background and why we are here.
Well, thank you, Alan, and welcome everybody who's here on the virtual meeting. So why create a plan? You know, Glendora finds itself at a once in a generation, probably a once in a lifetime transportation opportunity with a new light rail station set to open soon. This doesn't happen very often, and a lot of cities don't get these. This station will connect Glendora via the Metro A line to downtown Los Angeles, neighboring cities along the line, and the broader region through the rail network. Really, I think this is probably the most significant transportation development since the 210 freeway came through and was completed in the area decades ago. New major transit stations are powerful catalysts for development, jobs, commercial activities, and especially housing tend to cluster around transit-rich areas. In fact, many employers actively seek locations near transit hubs for those reasons. And for residents, it's going to open up more living options that are less car dependent. So this is truly a watershed moment for Glendora and a chance. This plan gives us a chance to hit the ground running by creating a clear vision for how the area around the station can grow, thrive, and develop in the future, really over the next 20 years. Next slide, please. So just, how did this come about? A few notes on plan funding. This planning effort was primarily funded through an agreement with LA Metro, like a grant, under their Transit-Oriented Communities Technical Assistance Program, or TOCTAP for short. You may hear us use that acronym or may see that when you look at the plan online, and that's what it's referring to. Metro partners with local jurisdictions to create and adopt plans, policies, and programs that are transit supportive, helping communities both capture the value of transit investments and increase ridership in their system. Our draft vision plan aligns closely with Metro's transit supportive toolkit, which you'll see off to the right there, ensuring we are following best practices for transit-oriented planning. Next slide, please. So I think this is an important slide to sort of answer what is the vision plan, what it is not. So the vision plan is, what it is an illustration of the city's aspirations, a framework outlining various development scenarios that may happen, a guide to the regulatory adjustments needed to realize those scenarios, and a set of goals describing how growth and development might unfold around the Glendora station over the next 20-ish years. What the vision plan is not, it's not a rezoning, it's not a regulatory document, it's not a development project or proposal, and it's not approval of any specific building, development, or project. So it's a conceptual plan, it's hypothetical, it's a vision, and it gives policy direction to the city, and that's the intent. So next slide, please. So I just want to highlight that we are now, in sort of the tail end of a pretty robust public engagement effort for this project or plan. Public engagement has been a cornerstone of this effort since the beginning, and that's something the city wanted to see and Metro as well. Going all the way back to October of last year, we hosted an in-person community open house to introduce the vision plan, alongside our first online survey. The city widely promoted the survey through its website and social media channels. And if you don't follow Glendora, please follow it. We've got always have news and updates and things we push out on our social media channels. We also had a presence at Glendora's last two Earth Day celebrations, which you've attended, are very well attended events for the city. Fortunately, this year's event was a little soggy, but we'll gladly take the rain here in Southern California. We are now hosting the first of two virtual open houses, one tonight, and the next one will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. You're welcome to participate in both. Both of these were widely publicized online. Also, invitations were mailed to all property owners and key businesses within a 1/2 mile radius of the future station. And that was same for the actual open house that was in person back in October. Finally, the completed plan will go before the Planning Commission, Glendora's Planning Commission, and City Council for review, and we expect adoption in the coming months, sometime over the summer. Next slide, please. So I kind of talked about this a little bit, but in terms of schedule and key milestones, we're now about 1 year into this planning process, which was designed to take about a year from start to finish. So that's kind of how it was scoped and how it was designed. As you can see from the schedule, we are currently wrapping up public engagement over the next few weeks and moving toward Planning Commission and City Council review probably this summer, maybe later this spring, early summer. We're excited to be entering this final stage of the project, or final stages, and hope that everybody here can participate, and those that aren't will as well through the webpage, which we'll demonstrate later. So, and questions here. So I think with that, those are my slides, and I'll hand it over to Chad to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Hans. So I'll continue and talk about the contents of the plan. I'll go over the actual vision and basically how we got there. And at the end of the presentation, again, we'll give a demonstration on how to view, download, and provide comments to the plan. So what's in the plan? There's two main documents. The main document is organized into 5 chapters. It includes the introduction, which provides an overview of the project, the vision, chapter on development scenarios, public realm improvements, and implementation. The plan is accompanied by a series of appendices that provide technical analysis that inform the plan. Okay, so the study area. The study area focuses generally a 1/2 mile radius around the future Glendora station. So the Glendora station is roughly at the intersection closest to Ada and Vermont Avenue. And the 1/2 mile radius is shown in the outer dashed line on this map. And the reason we start with a 1/2 mile radius is that it's roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, and that's about the distance or time that someone is willing to walk to get to a transit station. The boundary was then further refined to exclude areas that are not likely to change, such as low-density residential uses and recent development projects. So the refined project boundary, or the study area, is then shown in the darker, bold black line here on the map. Some key features that are included within the study area, shown in the blue and red colors here, include the Glendora Village along Glendora Avenue, the Albertsons Shopping Center just south of the station, the Vaughn's Shopping Center at Grand Avenue and Foothill, and the Civic Center and the Post Office are included within the study area. Key streets or corridors include Foothill Boulevard, Route 66, Glendora Avenue, and Vermont Avenue. Okay, so the urban design concept. The urban design concept informs the vision and provides a framework for land uses in the station area. The goal of the concept is to create an attractive, diverse, and vibrant neighborhood with a mix of medium and high-density residential uses within walking and biking distance to the future Glendora station. High-density mixed uses are focused just south of the station that would provide future residents with convenient transit access. Another medium mixed-use anchor is located at the intersection of Foothill and Glendora Avenue, to emphasize the intersection as a southern gateway to Glendora Village, as well as the adjacent Civic Center. Activity nodes shown in the blue stars provide placemaking opportunities such as public plazas and art, while key connections shown in the white and green arrows include public realm enhancements to facilitate safe and comfortable movement to and from the station and throughout the study area. The urban design vision is then translated into an illustrative plan. The illustrative plan illustrates a possible pattern of development around the Glendora station. Following transit-oriented development principles, higher densities are focused adjacent to the station, while smaller scale developments are located in other focus area. The illustrative plan reflects potential development scenarios that support a pedestrian and transit-oriented environment. This drawing does not require that specific buildings be constructed on these opportunity sites, but rather suggests the possibilities the plan creates for property owners. And I'll take a brief pause. I'm just making sure that everyone can see the PowerPoint. We're good.
We're getting feedback that people can see the PowerPoint. If you're not able to see the PowerPoint, please take a look at the very top of the screen. Near the menu, there's a little bubble icon that says Chad So's screen. You'll want to make sure you click on that, and that should pull up the slides if you're not able to see them.
All right, I'll give it a few seconds. Go ahead. All right, I'll continue on. Okay, so that was the urban design vision. So I'll dive into a little bit of how we got there and the process. Okay, so first, in an effort to understand the development interest around transit stations, we reviewed recent development around 5 nearby Metro A line stations, including Monrovia, Duarte, Azusa, Claremont, and Montclair. The case studies focus on transit-oriented development projects such as multifamily apartments and mixed-use buildings. And what we found typical of nearby transit-oriented development was that they tended to be 4 to 6 story wrap structures or residential units wrapping around an interior parking structure. In addition to the case studies, we conducted a robust existing conditions analysis that reviewed the urban environment within the study area. Examples of analysis topics included land use, community assets, building to lot coverage, ownership, and utilization rates. And again, the complete analysis is found in Appendix C that's downloadable on the website. So following the existing conditions analysis, the next step was to determine which areas are best suited and most likely to accommodate new transit-oriented development. To do that, we assigned each parcel a development opportunity score. The opportunity score is a summation of points assigned to each parcel based on various criteria such as lot size, lot coverage, contiguous ownership, and vacancy. The higher the score the property receives, the more likely the property would attract transit-oriented development. So the map shown here shows areas that scored high with the darker blue. So some of these, I think the significant site is just south of the station. There's parcels that are larger in size, may have low lot coverage or vacant or had contiguous ownership. So because they hit more criteria listed in the table here, they scored higher and in turn had a higher development opportunity score. So once we had preliminary opportunity sites, we took this and we went out to the community, as Hans mentioned earlier, and asked what types of development should be encouraged and where should they go. We received a range of responses with 3-story residential being receiving the highest amount of votes, followed closely by higher density mixed use. So to recap, we conducted case studies, reviewed existing conditions, analyzed development opportunities, and collected public input. This process informed the creation of development scenarios and selected focus areas. We honed in on 6 focus areas, shown in the darker blue on the map here. Each focus area has a development scenario that showcases the preferred development capacity. It's important to note that as we were thinking about this, the 2021-2029 housing element identified sites within the study area that could accommodate about 1,000 units. The development scheme summarized in the table on the slide accommodates various development types to achieve 1,100 units. And in a moment, we'll go through each of the focus areas. So again, the process that I just described led up to the development scenarios and the urban design concept translated to this urban design illustrative plan, which illustrates a possible pattern of development to support a pedestrian and transit-oriented environment. And again, this drawing does not require that specific buildings be constructed on these sites, but rather suggests the possibilities the plan creates for property owners. So I'll pass it over to Alan.
All right, thank you, Chad. For the team, I've received 2 messages that were sent to me direct and not in the group chat, it appears. So I think it'd be prudent to pause and attempt to answer those 2 questions before we move forward. We have about 10 more slides to get through, and then we'll conclude our presentation with Chad's demonstration of the project website, how to access that and follow along for more information. But in the meantime, let's talk about these 2 questions. So one of them asks, why are low density areas unlikely to change and therefore excluded from the study area? I think the best answer to this might be to back up 2 slides, Chad. And to sort of think about some of these sites that are kind of been identified here. So I'll attempt to answer this, and if city staff wants to chime in, that'd be helpful. One of the reasons we looked at this is that many of the sites that were excluded from the study area within that half-mile circle surrounding the train station are today single-family residential. They're much smaller lots than the kind of larger scale commercial lots you see directly south of the station or along Foothill Boulevard. Individual parcels of that size tend to change very slowly and in a kind of small scale rather than in the kind of larger scale developments that tend to cluster around kind of like the commercial properties. So just thinking about the character and the kind of scale of development that we've been asked to plan for, which is larger scale multifamily development, looking at those single family zone parcels, the parcels that contain single family residents today, really is not very productive because the degree of change that's likely to occur there is very slow. Certainly, it's possible that a developer might come along and slowly acquire an entire block of homes, but that would take a much longer period of time than a developer simply acquiring a property already zoned for commercial uses that's a couple of acres in size. So we really wanted to focus on these kind of larger scale properties that are currently developed as commercial uses, as those are the sites that have the greatest propensity for change, and really didn't think that was necessary to look at all those individual parcels. There are some parcels that are not currently occupied by single family properties that are outside or within that half-mile radius from the train station that we did exclude. But as Chad mentioned, many of those parcels actually have been recently developed with new projects in the past 10 years, and those parcels are also unlikely to change. The financing loans for those developments is probably still being paid off, and if it's a new development, it seems unlikely that it's going to be redeveloped in the next 10 to 20 years. So that's in large measure why we excluded a number of the parcels that are within the larger study areas, to really focus on a kind of contiguous collection of parcels that was largely defined by being mostly commercial properties today. So I don't know if staff wants to jump in and kind of add anything to that before we move on to the second question.
No, I think that's a great answer, Alan, and I think that really sort of sums it up, the difficulty and sort of what it would take over time scale and complexity and getting multiple folks to work together to assemble parcels, many small parcels. We focused on some of the city's housing sites and the housing element, and those locations as some of the, more likely to develop. I think in terms of thinking about it, sort of in these like areas of change and stability. If you drive around the area around here, many of the houses across the street from City Hall, even, they've been there for 100 years, 50 years, 75 years, et cetera. So, when we were sort of planning this and thinking where development would go, it seems unlikely that many of the existing and sometimes even historic single family neighborhoods around here are going to change, drastically over the next 20-year time frame. You will get things like accessory dwelling units, and we see a fair amount of those, and maybe SB9s and stuff like that. Some change happening within the context of single family type zoning or detached house zoning, but not some of the bigger moves that the plan addresses. So I think that was a great answer for it.
Okay, the second question comes from somebody who lives just up the road from the train station and asks, has there been any analysis as to the impact of the community as it pertains to incoming unhoused people? Let me say that in the context of the plan that's been drafted, that's available online, that is not a question that's been addressed. I don't know if city staff wants to speak to conversations you've had with Metro regarding that. I'm going to assume the concern may have to do with the unhoused people arriving by train, but I'm making that as an assumption.
Yeah, we're not aware of a study on that particular issue as it relates to the train. You know, addressing unhoused populations and sort of homelessness in general has been an issue that the city is addressing. Participate in annual counts and have programs for that. But in terms of the scope as it relates to this plan, working on sort of a transit-oriented development vision for the station, the issue of unhoused populations related to the transit is not something that the city's studied that we're aware of or as part of.
But it's a very good question. I will say we are working in a number of other cities with future rail lines, and particularly the cities that are the terminus stations for future rail lines are very concerned about this. So we can follow up with Metro as to their current policies as to how they're addressing that, because Metro is evolving their policies in response to this particular challenge. So these are the only two questions I had thus far. So I think we'll move on with the presentation. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the development scenarios that the plan illustrates on these 6 different focus area sites that Chad described earlier. So again, these focus area sites were selected on the basis of a series of criteria that were applied to how we thought about the different properties within the study areas and which properties seem to have the greatest relative likelihood to be of interest to future developers. I am not going to go through all 6 of these in great detail. I'm going to invite you to read the plan and the descriptions of these and think about these scenarios critically and provide your feedback after you've taken a deep look at these. But I will spend a little bit of time here on focus area A because it is illustrative of how we've thought about the entire plan area and the development scenarios in particular. So focus area A is located directly south of the future train station on the east side of Vermont, extends down to Route 66. It includes the site that Metro or the Gold Line Construction Authority controls and is currently building out as park and ride lot, but we know that they've identified that as a site for future development through Metro's joint development agreement process. This site abuts, but does not include the Albertsons that fronts onto Route 66. It's currently a collection of industrial properties. Like I said, the Metro property, there's a car wash at the corner. One of these or some collection of these properties has recently been on the real estate market, so we would presume there'd be pretty strong interest in this site or collection of sites. What we've drawn in the upper right is a series of different buildings or possible buildings that would potentially build out this area. And a couple of things to note here. Number one is there are some new streets that are indicated. They're east-west streets that would extend from Vermont to the east. We think it's important that as this large area builds out, that there's streets or pedestrian passages that turn this from one large development site into a series of smaller blocks size pieces that really builds out a neighborhood as opposed to just a giant development. So we're proposing that there's some east-west and even some north-south streets or pedestrian passages that break this large set of sites down into smaller pieces. We've also drawn this with some larger developments that be between 4 to 6 stories that are either up against the train station itself at the north, that's labeled A1, if you can read the little black icon. A3 and A4 are some also larger developments that are generally pushed back from Vermont Avenue, so to be somewhat less visible from Vermont Avenue. And then labeled at A2 is a series of smaller structures. These would be potentially 3-story townhomes, like you see directly north of the station today, or sort of walk-up apartments. Again, a prototype directly north of the station today, the neighborhood called Glendora Station Village. It's kind of emblematic of that scale of development. The red box is a freestanding commercial building that would front out onto Route 66, potentially be part of a kind of larger complex of multifamily housing. So what we're showing here is a scenario in which we think the one size fits all is not the right scenario for Glendora. You can see that that strategy has been employed to some extent in Duarte or Monrovia. As you drive down the freeway, you see these very large developments that sit up against the freeway. And the stations that they're building in those communities are operating today. We think that's not the right approach in Glendora. We think the right approach in Glendora is higher intensity 4 to 6 story development adjacent to the train station or pushed back from the public streets and intermixed with a series of smaller scale developments. So we think that's the right approach, that it's a mix that provides different housing opportunities, whether it's ownership or rental, different kinds of price points for different kinds of lifestyles and people at different stages in their kind of life cycle. So that's the way we've approached this. Like I said, this illustration is emblematic of that approach. Go to the next slide. Focus area B looks at the west side of Vermont, where there's a smaller collection of parcels, not quite as large. And so what we've drawn here also illustrates an approach and a strategy we employed as we drew up these different scenarios. In this case, we've drawn 4 separate developments. These would all be roughly 3-story apartment complexes with some surface parking, some tuck under parking. But each one of these sits on an individual parcel of land owned by a separate owner. So we're imagining that as we drew these up, that individual parcels would be developed by individual owners if they had the interest in participating or kind of redeveloping their property. We generally did not assume that multiple parcels would be consolidated by some master developer in order to build out stuff. So sites B2 and B3 may be developed as housing, whereas the other sites B1 and B4 may remain as is if that's the desire of the property owner. So we really are trying to think through how we laid this out, really respecting existing parcel lines and existing ownership patterns, so that there's a lot of opportunity here for individual property owners to think about what's possible on their site. The other thing we've illustrated on these scenarios, and we're clicking here to scenario focus area C, but you can also see there's some tables that illustrate the development potential we've imagined in terms of the number of scale of development measured by stories or square footage of commercial space in number of units, and a scorecard about how this scenario ranks against the assumptions the city's housing plan or housing element has made for these same sites. Focus area C is a really critical site. It's at the southwest corner of Glendora Avenue and Foothill Boulevard. It's right across the street from City Hall, and it is at the south end of Glendora Village. So there's a real opportunity here to do something significant that provides both a kind of commercial anchor to the village. We think development here could potentially accommodate like something on the scale of a drugstore or a small grocery store is a possibility, but also that there could be something, and we've kind of crudely illustrated a little bit of a kind of like a tower. You can imagine that being a clock tower at the corner of Glendora and Foothill with a small public plaza. Could include a fountain, as I said, kind of a south anchor at the foot of Glendora Village. Next scenario, please, is Site D. This is located on Foothill Boulevard, south of the Vaughn's Shopping Center, and is a kind of odd triangular site that is somewhat unseen from the city or from the street, but it does back up against the Gold Line right-of-way or the Metro right-of-way. And this is where the rail line begins to climb that giant concrete bridge that flies over the intersection of Foothill and Grand. So we drew up two different scenarios for this site, just to sort of think about different possibilities. The first one here imagines this as a mostly three-story neighborhood of townhomes and walk-up apartments that really does try and respect existing property lines. But if all the properties there were developed as three stories, there could be this interesting little three-story townhome apartment neighborhood. The other scenario, which is the next slide, imagines that all these properties are somehow consolidated together and potentially developed out as a much more robust, higher development at more to the 4 to 6 stories. This is something that is a possibility because it does back up against this fairly large bridge structure that Metro has built. So somewhat obscured, scale of this might be somewhat obscured from the surrounding streets. So there's a number of different ways this particular footprint could be developed, but this is an alternative scenario for this particular site. Two more to go. So the next one, focus area E, this is at the very north end of the village on Glendora Avenue and Bennett. Here we've imagined a modest mixed-use building, 3 stories, some surface parking, and commercial square footage fronting onto Glendora Avenue to extend the experience of the village retail environment. And then the final focus area looks at a set of properties on the south side of Route 66, just east of Glendora Avenue. This is an interesting combination of properties because the ownership pattern here is very fragmented, and many of these properties are very narrow and very deep, with vehicle access only really possible from Route 66. So again, trying to respect property boundaries and ownership as they exist today. The only real possibility on here is different combinations of 3-story townhome developments with some surface parking and some kind of tuck under or garage parking. Next slide, please. We also imagine through this, and illustrated in the vision plan that's online, that there should be a number of public works improvements to public streets and potentially private streets that we've described. So the first and probably the most important one is Vermont Avenue between Route 66 north up to Ada and the train station. As you've seen, there's a lot of possibilities for new development, some that's being discussed today through Metro and properties under that are listed for sale. So really thinking about kind of pedestrian scale improvements, mostly in the form of street trees and sidewalk improvements on Vermont is going to be kind of critical to making that an attractive environment for people who might live in these future developments. Related to that is the idea that there's potentially east-west streets coming off of Vermont, or particularly leading east off of Vermont. These would probably be privately constructed streets. So we're providing the city some guidance as to how to think about those streets and how to sort of steer developers in the right direction to build out, as I said, a future neighborhood and not a giant development project. The last scenario we looked at in this case is Foothill Boulevard east or going west from the village. So as I said, we looked at this site up against the flyover at Vermont or Foothill and Grand as a potential development possibility. And so making that connected to the village, we think that some improvements on Foothill Boulevard would probably be warranted. Other paths and public works improvements, street improvements that are identified on this map are already adopted as part of the city's existing first mile, last mile projects associated with the construction of the trains. So some of those improvements will be underway soon. So we're adding to this existing map that's already been identified by the city. Next slide, please. So the last section of the vision plan talks about the implementation ideas, and there's principally kind of 2 tools that the city has to encourage development to follow these patterns that we've described. So the next slide speaks to the first one of those tools, and that's the city's general plan land use map. The land use map is the kind of constitutional document for how the city thinks about land use development. It contains a number of different categories about how land is designated and therefore what's permitted on those lands and at what densities. It's a little bit different than zoning. It's a kind of higher level document if you're not familiar with it. But we are proposing two new land use designations surrounding the train station. The first is a transit-oriented district that would include properties directly south of the train station down to Route 66, and including the site currently occupied by Albertsons. The other sites that surround that, they're indicated in the kind of pink hatching as what we call a mixed-use corridor designation. So this would be a mixed-use designation that would allow for a variety of different kinds of densities to be developed as implemented through zoning. So the next slide speaks to zoning. Zoning is an implementation tool of the general plan. It dives into greater detail. It provides information about specific development standards and specific kinds of land uses, whether a particular use is a permitted use, whether it requires a conditional use permit, etc. So zoning gets into a lot more detail than the general plan. And in this case, we're recommending 4 different potential zoning categories be entertained as the city looks at implementing the plan over time. So there's 3 different mixed use zones. We call them creatively mixed use 1, 2, and 3, and then a town center transit mixed use zone is the third. So the transit mixed use zone applies to the TOD land use designation directly south of the train station, and the mixed use 1, 2, and 3 would be different implementation tools to the mixed use land use category. And so you can see on the chart, there's a kind of variety of different densities that would be assigned to each of those zoning districts. We're not at this point identifying which parcels would meet those zoning standards, or whether they would stay under their existing zoning. That is all part of an exercise that the city would have to undertake with its own public process in the future. And then relative to allowable commercial uses, you can see we're trying to track against the city's existing C1, C2, and C3 commercial uses. So there's kind of a correspondence. Something gets rezoned potentially as mixed use 2, and it's currently a C2 zone. The commercial uses would be able to continue happily under the current regulations that they have. So we're really kind of trying to craft this as a roadmap for the city to thoughtfully apply these standards potentially across properties and provide the least amount of kind of static or kind of chaos for existing commercial uses that want to remain in place. But again, this would all be for future implementation strategies with its own public process and its own kind of public noticing. So next slide, almost done. So next steps relative to this overall process. We're going to hold open our public review period till May 9th. So please provide comments on the website. You'll get a chance to see that momentarily. You can provide comments on the website. And then at some point this summer, we hope to be in front of both the Planning Commission and then later City Council for those 2 bodies to provide feedback and kind of direction on these 2 plans. So those will happen later this summer, no sooner than June, I would say, based on current scheduling. But that would be kind of the next steps. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chad to kind of illustrate the city's the plan website and how you can provide direct written feedback to the plan. And meanwhile, I'll post to our kind of project team some of the questions that have come to me. Again, these have all been posted to me directly. So I'll post them in our kind of team chat. We can answer them after Chad's done.
Thanks, Evan. Do you see the website here, or is it still the PowerPoint?
I can see the website, Chad.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll go over how to view the document and how to comment on the document. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to visit the project website. And so that's GlendoraStationPlan.com if you haven't seen the website before, and I'll drop it in the chat. And so there's multiple ways to to click through to see the document. The easiest way is when you enter the website, you'll land on the home page. There's a big box that says how to participate, and then there's another green box that says review the draft station area vision plan. You can go ahead and click on that button, and I'll take you directly to our embedded plan viewer. What you do is to move through the pages, there's a arrow, and you'll click on that arrow, and it'll start to flip through the pages, and you can go ahead and review the plan in that fashion. There's a little plus so that you can zoom in to specific pages. You can go full screen with the bottom right icon. Do that as an example. And you can also download the plan as a PDF. You can do that within the embedded viewer here on the issue platform. There's a little icon with an arrow, and as I hover over it, you'll see it'll say download, so you can download that in that way. Or if you scroll down, there are 2 links to download the plan. The first link will give you the main document PDF, and the second link will allow you to download the appendices, and they will download as PDFs. Another thing to note is that both documents are intended to be viewed as a 2-page spread with a back cover, or a front cover and a back cover. So sometimes if you're viewing this issue on your phone or tablet, I recommend rotating your phone into a landscape mode or horizontal mode so you can see the 2-page spreads. And same thing with the PDF. You could set your viewer to a 2-page spread. And then for reference, back at the home page, you can also click review the plan, and it'll take you to the same page where you can scroll down and get back to this viewer and download links. And same thing on the review the plan page up at the top. There's the same button that will scroll you to the viewer and download links. Now, how do you provide comments? So again, we like to direct you to view the plan and provide us written comments through our form here. So we just scroll down on the web page, and then there's this form for you to comment on. So the first, you go ahead and fill out this form, and you can provide as many comments as you like. The first question asks, what are you commenting on? So that could be a page number, a section, a topic, or if you have a general comment, you can type that in as well. So I'll provide an example. I'm going to say a general comment, or even if you have a question, you can include that here. This next box, there's space for you to provide your comment. So I'll just type in test, comment, or question. And then the following boxes are optional, where you can provide your contact information, such as your name and your email address. You can also fill out these boxes if you want to stay updated about the plan, and just let us know in either the first 2 fields, and put your name, and we can send you further information as the plan progresses. And so I'll go ahead and submit a test comment. And so once you press submit, it will provide a confirmation box, and then you will then press here to submit another response. So there's a little here that's highlighted. And then so the form refreshes, and then you can go ahead and submit additional comments as you like. Another site I wanted to mention was the city's website. So this is just another way to stay involved. And so we'll go to cityofglendora.gov, and I'll also pop that into the chat while I'm here. And so when you type that in, it'll take you to the home page. And what you want to do is you go over to meetings and agendas. And then you scroll down, and you can type in your email address here, and you'll press notify me. And then you'll get some options to select to verify which type of notification you want to get. And the meetings I think you want to follow are the planning commission meetings and the city council meetings. And you look at their agendas and see whether the Glendora Station area plan is on the agenda or any other topic that you might be of interested in. That's just another way to follow what's going on in the city and keep track of the station area plan. So with that, I will return to the PowerPoint and open up to see if we have any questions, additional questions. And again, please put your questions into the chat. And if you have any other questions, we can go through them.
Okay, thank you, Chad. A number of questions have been posted in the chat directly to me, so I'll kind of read through them and we can try and answer them. So the first question is a question, do the questions/comments go to just PlaceWorks or to the city as well? This came up while you were demonstrating the website. The answer to that is that the PlaceWorks is the kind of a holder and manager of the website, so the questions do come to PlaceWorks. We are recording all of them and we do share everything we receive with city staff. So staff will be 100% aware of what we receive. It's part of our obligation to share that information with them. So that answers that question. Next question, and I have three here, is maybe a comment/question. This says, we can probably safely assume many of the residents of sites A, B, and F, those would be the development scenarios we kind of work through, would make use of the new commuter station. However, we should also assume a number of them will not. What impact is anticipated on road congestion? Hans, city staff, do you want to kind of take a jump at kind of where we stand on kind of thinking about traffic impacts as it might relate to this? I will say just on the outset that doing a traffic analysis of that nature has not been part of the scope of work that we've been contracted for to do for the city. So I know there's been a lot of mobility planning work done by the city. Maybe you can update us on where that stands.
Yeah, so there are, as we've kind of talked to in the public improvements slide, which I think we had up earlier, there are going to be transportation first and last mile sort of within this area around transit investments that the city's making. I'm not in the public works department, so I can just talk about it sort of in general, but some improvements to, mobility, things for all users, so like bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And this shows some of the public realm improvements here. So, there's everything from, some corridor enhancements to, some other specific things that we're sort of envisioning here, which is to make it friendly for all modalities, which is, pedestrians, bicycles, and cars, and transit for that matter. I think a thing to kind of have in the that I think of oftentimes with this is, and sometimes it's maybe a little counterintuitive, but the single family home, according to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, generates around 10 vehicle trips per house per day on average. And that's the people that live there, that's people that work on the houses, that's, if you have a pool, people that might service the pool, that sort of stuff. Multifamily developments, depending on the density, generate between 4 and 6 trips per unit per day. So typically they generate for, an apartment building or townhome development, something condo, something like that, are going to have less trips per unit. Will the net total trips be greater in the area if the development happens? Sure. But again, we're also predicating this plan on this, as I sort of said, a once in a generation transit opportunity that's happening here, which is we are literally looking at stuff within a walk distance, 10 to 15 minute walk of an expanding light rail network to the region. So we're hoping that people that are shopping, people that are, you want to go down and see a Dodgers game, if you live here and want to go that way to downtown, or if you're coming to Glendora to hang out at the Halloween or wine stroll or something at the village, that you'll take the train if you're coming to the city. So that I think will help with some of that. So that I think that's what I can mention to that. The other thing to mention too is there's larger developments that come in. So any of the again, this is a hypothetical plan, but some of the things that we're envisioning here, some of these, maybe larger apartment buildings, et cetera, around the station, some of those would have to do their own traffic analyses as well as part of their site-specific development plans or site plans, and that would go through the review process that we have for that here in Glendora as well. So they'd have to meet the standards that we could apply as a city to them. And sometimes some of the things we recommend for larger projects to help offset some of their traffic impacts, are sort of best practices like, things like bike lockers and bike racks and things like that to help encourage people to take other modes of transportation, other than the single car for a trip. So
Hans, you slightly touched on it, but maybe you could answer more explicitly here. Another question that was asked, if any of these developments come to fruition, would CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which sometimes generates environmental impact reports or EIR, would CEQA come into effect? And I think you
that's
alluded
another
to it
great
with
question.
your comment
Sure.
about traffic studies.
Yeah, that's a good question. That would require some sort of traffic analysis as well if it did. So CEQA applies to California to discretionary projects. So if there's some sort of, if a development is going to be reviewed through a public hearing process, so planning commission, city council, it would likely trigger CEQA, and there's going to be some analysis based on that. That again is a very 30,000-foot view. It's going to be based upon the project. Some projects and infill things can be exempt from CEQA under a statutory or specific exemption, but larger ones probably would not, and they would have some sort of CEQA component, which would then trigger the environmental reviews to sensitive receptors for everything associated with the development, including traffic and the impacts of that.
Okay, thanks, Hans. Two more kind of questions and comments that I've got posted here. One of them says, I see that some of these ideas in the vision plan involve lot consolidation. Has this hampered other cities/stations in implementing vision plans that involved consolidations, or are there ways the city can streamline or encourage that process? As I said, I think, one of the things we looked at when we kind of evaluated these parcels and these properties and drew up the development scenarios is we tried to be very cautious or careful about drawing scenarios that respected existing ownership patterns. In some cases, like on site A, there are a number of individual parcels that you can see there, but quite a few of them are actually under combined ownership. So as we drew up the scenarios for site A, we were really paying attention to the ownership patterns of those different parcels as we sort of thought about what was possible. Likewise, with the west side of Vermont, those are drawn up to indicate existing ownership patterns as we best understand them. We may have gotten that information wrong from the county assessor's office, but we drew these up based on what we know about ownership patterns from public records. So we really did try and respect those existing ownership patterns. That being said, certainly if, say on site F, kind of on Route 66 down there's a number of small parcels, variety of different ownerships. If someone were able to consolidate those properties under a single ownership, they would be able to do a very different kind of development than what we've drawn out. So the question relative to encouraging lot consolidation process or streamlining that process is something we can kind of look at and explore. But one of the things we've recommended as part of the recommended zoning implementation strategy is an opportunity for increasing the allowable density if you are able to consolidate properties to a larger scale. So you can see, let's take a look at kind of towards the middle there, MU-2. We've recommended the base height and density be 40 units an acre. But if you're able to consolidate or get a parcel over 1 acre because you've acquired adjoining parcels, then potentially it could go up to 50 units an acre. And then if you could go to get up to 1.5 acres of site, then maybe that could increase to 60. Now, again, these are recommendations for the city to entertain and explore and investigate and kind of additional processes. But this is where we've been thinking about how can we encourage that kind of lot consolidation. And the logic, of course, is that increased density increases the value of a particular property. And the larger the property is, the more room there is on that parcel for that increased density to be sensitively designed to its surrounding context. So we can explore that in greater detail with city staff about how we can further encourage that process. But that's kind of our answer at this point. The next comment I have, and we've got one more that came through, so I'll read the next one. I think this next one is probably more of a comment to us rather than necessarily a question. It says, I support increased housing density. However, a thought I have at looking at site D is that the higher story complex, which is the next scenario we drew, would block out the view of the foothills for many existing homeowners. The thing that sold me on my home was the beautiful view of the foothills. Where I live in the home south of site D, but north of the train where the rectangular strip moves eastward, I think I'd just about cry if I knew they were erecting a 4-story building in front of the view. Perhaps that impact should also be considered for locals, many of whom called the foothills their homes for a generation. I think that's a very fair comment. I think we should just take that as a comment, not necessarily try and answer that we've solved that particular problem, but something we can take under further consideration as the plan evolves. Next comment here, and the next one that just came through. Can you explain the impact of Metro's joint development policy and affordable housing requirement on the proposed plans? I'll take a stab at this, and I don't know, Hans, if you want to jump in on kind of the obligations of the grant. But as I mentioned, there is a site directly south of the train station that Metro controls. They have recently included that as part of a package of sites across the entire Metro system that they own, as part of a joint development. Essentially, what they're doing is they're offering out these sites to developers to acquire those properties and then develop them consistent with Metro's policy. Metro's policy requires that those properties be affordable housing. So it's very certain that whatever that site directly south of the train station would be developed through some agreement with Metro and would include, if not 100% affordable housing, then a pretty significant portion of affordable housing. That is part of Metro's policy for engaging in development on land that they control. That's the latest information I have on that. As it relates to other properties that Metro does not control within the plan area, Hans, do you want to kind of chime in on how the city's sort of thinking about those sites?
Well, I think, the city housing elements, the city has a number of plans. It's got the housing element, which is sort of the master vision for meeting our sort of meeting our housing goals as a local jurisdiction in California. And, that calls for the city to create or facilitate the production of, I think it's roughly 2,300. It's actually up on the screen right now, 2276, 2,300 roughly housing units. Some of those, those are the goals for those to be housing for, all income levels. So some of those to meet our RENA obligation have to be affordable at different affordability levels. Will that happen just like that? I don't know. It's our goal. It's what's committed to in our housing element, and the city has made efforts to provide a regulatory environment where that can happen through our housing sites. Specific to this plan, I don't know if we talked about it a lot, but two of the I can speak to sort of our grant and agreement with Metro for this plan, which is that two things or two objectives that this plan has to meet in terms of our agreement with Metro is it has to consider affordable housing, which it does. We're actually looking at a section on that now on the screen. And so there's an analysis given to that. And also it has to consider how to achieve our regional housing needs assessment, which is again, I referred to that allotment of housing that the city is responsible for creating or facilitating the production of through zoning and other regulatory tools and incentives. Lot consolidation could be such an incentive. So within that half-mile radius that Chad mentioned earlier, that watershed, our study area, the city's committed prior to this plan to creating and facilitating the production of roughly 1,300 housing units. And so again, some of those are supposed to be, those have to be affordable housing for different, at different income levels. So, I think, there's various incentives. We've got a whole bunch of stuff we've done through our housing element implementation, separate to this plan, to try to incentivize housing in this area, and the other housing sites as well. There's, some density bonuses. There's, various other incentives in terms of, different standards for them, density bonuses. We also have, incentives to try to preserve commercial as part of a housing development that preserves some affordability. So there's a lot of different things we've looked at and considered as a city. But yes, that will be a component, and that those two things are achieving our RHNA, or regional housing needs assessment numbers, specifically within this 1/2 mile area, and considering that some of those have to be affordable housing for folks at income at different levels, is part of the DNA of the plan, and has to be that way per our agreement with Metro to do the plan. And they're the ones paying for it.
So final comment on that is this page spread that Chad has up on the screen. This is not something we covered in the slide presentation, but it is part of the PDF file that you can download online. And part of the full plan document is a review of the kind of the economics of affordable housing, if you will, and what is typically the way affordable housing development is brought to fruition is that affordable housing developers have to assemble a number of different funding sources, including state tax credits, that is part of a kind of a lottery system that applicants, affordable housing developers have to go through. The short and the kind of like takeaway from that is that affordable housing developers sometimes take more than a year, sometimes 2 years, to be able to assemble the various packages of funding in order to do 100% affordable housing. That makes it very challenging and very expensive for them to acquire property on the open real estate market and then sit on it paying taxes and income and maintenance, et cetera, on those properties for a number of years while they get the funding together to be able to build an affordable housing development. As a result of that, much of the affordable housing projects you see across the region that are done by these developers tend to be on land that is controlled by institutions, whether that's cities, metro, potentially school districts have started to look at some of their lands for housing sites, and we've identified that there are some other institutional partners in the plan area that potentially could participate and hold the land while an affordable housing developer assembles the funding necessary. So we've identified those sites and said there are possibilities for institutional partners, including the city, to be able to participate in providing sites for affordable housing. But we don't necessarily identify that those sites should be, one of the ones that probably is mapped, but is probably not available, is the Civic Center, where City Hall and the library is located. That is an institutionally owned piece of land, but pretty unlikely that the city is going to entertain doing an affordable housing development in the front yard of City Hall. But so there's a kind of in-depth kind of look of this question and the full plan that's available online.
Yeah, and also I'd like to add on to that, and that's a good analysis there, is that, with many of the different tax credits and incentives for affordable housing at, state and what's left at the federal level, is they often score those higher and give priority to sites that are within a walking distance of transit, a major transit station, and also a downtown area as well, urban core. So this area within the 1/2 mile is a good location to provide housing for all income levels. And finally, transportation costs are a huge burden on probably all households that commute in Los Angeles County and Southern California for that matter. And when considering housing options and choices for folks at different income levels, creating an environment where you don't need to have 2 cars per household, or maybe even one, is another great benefit to having and concentrating housing and commercial activity in areas around served by robust transit networks. And it helps make housing more affordable. So
I don't see any further questions in the chat, or questions have been directed to me through the chat. So I think we can kind of leave the floor open for a moment. If people want to drop messages in the chat, we can answer those.
One thing I'll
Otherwise,
mention too, I just want to jump on and say, I think there was a question earlier and you did a great job of answering about like, will the city get to see the questions and things? Everything that's asked in here and that's put on the website, we are going to get, that will be, and that'll end up probably in one of the appendices of the plan under the public engagement section. So what you say on the plan is not going to disappear. It's going to live. And there's a few questions and comments we've received tonight that I think, will probably precipitate a few changes, some, additional paragraph analysis or thought in the plan. And so your feedback absolutely matters. And I love that it says participants at the top of the meeting, because I hope everybody takes that opportunity to participate on the website and engage with the plan and leave your thoughts.
well, thank you, Hans. I think with that, it's 7:15. We've kept everybody for a little over 90 minutes. So I think we can probably adjourn tonight's meeting and thank everybody for participating. Again, we'll be hosting same presentation tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If you would want to tell somebody who wasn't able to participate tonight that they should tune in, they can do that. And then again, we will be recording of this will most likely end up on the project website for people who can't participate either tonight or tomorrow. So again, we thank you all for spending your evening with us, and thank you for the feedback you've provided tonight and the feedback you'll provide in the future.